r/AskReddit by Reddit and chill. Serious, what's a secret you will take to the grave but don't mind telling on the internet? Mentioned before. Will never tell anyone I had one of those expensive fancy life-sized sex dolls. Got rid of it at first opportunity after getting a real partner. But it's literally the only secret I have that I'm not willing to say to anyone in real life. Well, how does it compare? Only I know that my mother-in-law killed her dog by sitting on it. Poor thing. Almost happened to our neighbor's dog. too. Chihuahua. The overweight son sat on him and broke the dog's pelvis. It survived but could never walk a straight line again after that. Speaking of grave. When I was a teenager, some friends and I got really stoned and walked around the town cemetery. There was a whole section of generic flat grave markers from the 1800s. I found myself trying to imagine their lives in the same town I lived so long ago. Then I saw one plate kind of sticking up and crooked and I bent down to touch it. It wasn't attached at all. And I lifted it up in my hand. Right then, my asinine stoned teenage brain decided to put it in my backpack. I thought I'd somehow honor this stranger more than the shitty groundskeeper leaving it all willy-nilly in the middle of the aisle. None of my friends saw what I did. Few hours later. Sober. And the guilt and panic are setting in. I hid the plate in my closet for about a year before I chucked it back over the fence one day late at night. I hope Bessie Jane Holmes doesn't mind that I kept her for a while. I still think back and shudder at the guilt of such a moral duckery. If it makes you feel any better, I'd have enjoyed the company as a ghost. I used to work for the airport and so got very discounted fares for friends and family. My mom was going on a trip with her friend to Key West and they were gonna drive since flying was too expensive. I talked her into letting me handle the flying arrangements and they'd save a ton. A typical $500 plus flight turned into like $250 for both of them combined. Well, I was still kinda new at booking reservations and whatnot, and I ended up screwing up the reservation. I think I only booked it for one way or something. So the night before their flight, I rebooked it and paid the $450 for the both of them, money I really didn't have and have since never told my mom. It was for Mother's Day, so I figured that was my gift to her. It's been nearly 10 years since. That's a really wholesome story for a change. Hopefully it all worked out for you in the end. Me and my cousin took turns licking each other's a-holes when we were about 10 years old. I have vivid memory of it. We have never spoken of it since. We're both 25-year men now. And here I am too ashamed to admit to my partner that I want to lick his ass. I sharted on a New Year's party bus a few years ago. I thought it was just a fart but it was a small shotgun blast of fluid. I stayed calm and threw away my undies at the next bar. Luckily there was little or no shit on the inside of my jeans and I was able to continue the night with no one aware of my poop crime. That happened to me on Halloween a few years ago. I drank 6 Angry Orchards and sharted in my thong. I just calmly walked into the bathroom and tore the side seams of the underwear so I could take them off and throw them away without having to remove my fishnets. No one was the wiser. I agreed to a first date with someone to make him stop crying. 6 years later we're happily engaged and doing great. I don't know how well he remembers that, but I'm not bringing it up. Has he stopped crying yet? When I was a kid I used to shit in a tire in the garden because I was scared of getting locked in the toilet. When I was young I peed under the basement stairs every night. I was afraid my stepmother, at the time, would hurt me if I flushed the toilet and it woke her. So I went under the stairs in my room, a mattress in the basement. Edit. I am sorry for not answering for so long. I went to bed right after posting this and only just opened Reddit to answer a few questions. She was very abusive. This was a small thing compared to some. And yes, the smell was noticed eventually. She was actually a clean freak and while it took her longer than you might think to notice the smell, this was the kind of woman who would force me to wash her walls in bleach if she saw me touch one of them after going to the bathroom. She knew something in the basement smelled off, but never checked under the stairs. She would wash other parts of the bathroom and the smell of bleach would block out the smell of urine for a little while. Rinse and repeat. When it was found out what the smell actually was, I was screamed at. forced to wash under the stairs with bleach water, no gloves, and was kicked out of the house. My mother was called and was told to pick up a disgusting little shit. And I had to stand on the front porch with a single black garbage bag containing everything I owned while I waited to get picked up by my mother because I was not allowed back into the house. I was 7. Again. Sorry this took so long. I hope this helps anyone who wanted to know more. My father burned down my childhood home for the insurance money. He took me along as his alibi, so I could verify he wasn't anywhere near it when it happened. I was 13 years old. I remember crying so hard knowing my clothes, books, photos, all of it would be destroyed. I wasn't allowed to save anything because he told me it would have been too suspicious. I found out years later he blamed it on me, telling the fire chief, plus friends and family, the fire had started because I must have been secretly smoking in my bedroom. I've never smoked a cigarette in my life. I feel for you. Lesser than what happened to you. But my mom used to steal my grandfather's painkillers while he was dying of cancer, and I found out years later that the reason my whole extended family still hates me is because she told them I was the one doing it. Parents suck. Edit. I've literally never gotten an award for anything. Thank you for the medals. That my dad paid my mom $1,500 for full custody of my youngest sibling. Not only would this be a massive blow to my sibling, but my dad remarried quite quickly and the new wife is the very definition of an evil stepmom. If my sibling knew that our mom gave her up for such a small sum of money and the trade-off was 5+ years of abuse, she would be destroyed. My dad remarried with her evil stepmom. It's hard to try being with my beloved dad and being away from my evil stepmom. Luckily I live 9/5 with my mom and dad, so I see my dad for 5 days every 9 days. But still with my stepmom around. As a teenager, I had cancer multiple times and nearly died a lot. At one point, I spent several weeks in intensive care and survived despite no doctor thinking that I possibly could live. More than 20 years later, everyone I know still comments on how I survived purely on will to live. I actually spent every moment in that hospital bed in absolute agony, desperately wanting to die. Edit. Thank you to the kind folks for my first Reddit awards and for all of the kind words. I'm healthy now and doing well. Damn. I'm happy you made it out and I understand you don't want to disappoint them now. But you should with a very serious face tell them to stop. That's not a comment I'd like to hear. Especially when reality was that different. When I was an awkward tween, my brothers and I spent a lot of time at my grandparents' house. We had been raised by my grandparents since we were little kids. And even after my dad remarried, he and my stepmom both worked graveyard shifts, so we would spend the night at my grandparents' house while my parents were at work. One day, my grandmother informed me that it was my grandfather's birthday and suggested that I wish him a happy birthday. He was downstairs in the living room sitting on the sofa, and I went up to him and gave him a big hug around the neck and said happy birthday, Grandpa. It was kind of difficult to hug a person sitting down, so I ended up kneeling on the sofa between his legs rather than trying to hug him from a standing position. He was quite happy and gave me a hug back. When I pulled back from the hug, he held me in his arms and gave me a big smile. And then he put his tongue in my mouth. Sometimes when I was a little kid we would kiss other family members on the mouth, but those were chase pecks on the lips. I could tell immediately that this was different. His tongue was on my teeth. It lasted only for a moment and I was grossed out and confused when I pulled away. At that moment my grandmother walked into the living room. I turned my head to look at her. My hands were still on my grandpa's shoulders. For the rest of my tween and teen years, I was always careful not to be alone in the same room with my grandfather. He passed away during my 20s. A good decade ahead of his time due to lifestyle-induced health issues. And my family chose me to speak at his funeral. I had really complicated feelings about it because I did love him. My grandma and grandpa raised me, after all. Also, my grandfather was the rock of the family, and after he passed away, the three branches, my dad and our family, plus his siblings and their families, gradually grew apart. And nothing was ever the same between us again. We don't even spend Christmas all together anymore. I've never told anyone in my family about it because I couldn't break my grandmother's heart. She's survived her husband 10 years and still talks to and about him every day and visits his grave multiple times a week. So, thanks for listening to my story, Reddit. Nice to get that off my chest. It scares me how closely I can relate to this story. Like, how? Edit. My phone decided to glitch out. Grammar. But, yeah. This is almost exactly how things happened in my family. Hectic man. Take care of yourself. Seems like a good time as any to tell this story. When I was a teenager, my parents were divorced yet lived within walking distance of each other. I would oftentimes walk back and forth between their homes for whatever reason. I got to know a family that lived in the house on the corner of the block my mother lived on. One day as I was passing this house, I noticed a wallet on the ground. I picked up and opened the wallet. I noticed the address on the ID was the house on the corner and it was the mom of the family. A very nice lady. Me being a teenager, took all of the money out of the wallet, about $50. I then went back to the home and returned the wallet, explaining I found it down the street. The mother was very relieved and grateful. What always weighed on me is a few weeks later I passed the corner house as I often did and the lady stopped me. She wanted to thank me for returning the wallet and handed me a $50 bill. I tried to refuse it but she insisted. I was rewarded for stealing. While it's not a big secret, it is something I always think about for some reason. I've never really had the heart to tell anyone this story. Put a $100 bill in an envelope and put it in their mailbox. So my grandfather had a hand in making one of the World Series trophies back in the day. He never got any credit, but we have photos and parts from his prototype. When I was a teen, I added what I knew to Wikipedia, since why not, although I believe it's gone now. But funny story, I ended up being counted in newspapers all over the country. Proceed to a few years later, I get a call from my mom who's almost in tears of joy. She found that wiki page and was freaking out. She was so happy he finally got credit. She ended up making really fancy shadow boxes of the wiki page printed out. Copies of the photos and other baseball stuff. She made one for each of her siblings. I've had to just bite my tongue every time I go over there and see this thing hanging prominently in the living room. I ended up being counted in newspapers all over the country. It sounds like he did get the credit he deserved. Sometimes we have to speak up for those who won't speak up for themselves. My mother is cheating on my father and my father is cheating on my mother. They both know I know this but made me promise not to tell the other parent. Parents are ducked up sometimes. My dad cheated on my mom and invited the person over when I was 9. She was a severely overweight woman and my dad is also quite overweight. My parents were fighting but trying to work things out. They slept in separate rooms at this point. Earlier that day I had jumped on his bed and broke the board supporting it on the bed frame. I wasn't allowed to do this and always got in trouble for this reason. My mom smelled the fact that my dad had company because she smoked in my house. She asked if I jumped on the bed. I said no. I feared I'd get in trouble. I was surprised there was no follow-up trying to prove my guilt. Years later I remember why she asked and realized my lie basically incriminated him to ducking her. I'm sure he did, but that got him kicked out of my house. TLDR. I broke the damn bed. That's some Greek tragedy level of interlocking lies and motives. My first car accident back in high school was not because I swerved to miss a deal like I told my dad and the police. I actually tried to pull the emergency brake and do a 180 while going 50 miles per hour downhill. Had I gone off the other side of the road, I would have gone down a 50-foot hill and into the river. That was the last time I ever tried anything like that. There just so happened to be deer tracks in the mud near the ditch where I ended up. I avoided a ticket and my dad paid to fix my car. I have never told him the truth in the 15+ years since. I crashed my first car because I fell asleep at the wheel on my way to my girlfriend's house at the time. Literally like 2 seconds. Overcorrected. Spun across the highway. Ended up in a ditch. Nothing was hurt or broken except my car. So that was lucky. And I told my mom I swerved to miss hitting a dog. It seemed less embarrassing than the truth. This post is way too old for anyone to read that I masturbated to the demo version Outlaw Volleyball on the Xbox back in the day. Not too old. I was raped with an implement in the youth room of my childhood church by my two best friends at the time. We were basically alone in the building at the time. One did it, and the other held me down. They thought it was a joke funny. Even once I started screaming. One of them had a moment of clarity and I suppose realized that what they were doing was wrong. And made the other person stop. And they sat there with me for a few minutes until I'd calmed down. Once I regained myself enough to stand, I racked one of them between the legs with a pool cue. Their parents were waiting in the parking lot. And they were going to call the cops on me until my friend confessed what they'd done to their parents. I was pressured into silence by the pastor at the parents' behest. I've told people. So I guess it's not technically a secret. But nobody's believed me because I'm a big guy. And always have been. The last person I tried to talk to about it actually smacked me in the face. So I guess I'll be dying with this one. Edit. A word. Who the duck would smack you in the face for sharing something like that? Ducking like and subscribe.